That's your problem, Max. You just can't trust me. And that's exactly my problem with you. I can't trust you. And you know why we can't trust each other? Because we could be agents for the secret police. And that's the source of the power. That's the institutional innovation of totalitarianism that didn't exist anywhere else.
Greetings, revolutionaries. Today, we're joined by Aviezer Tucker. Avi is a philosopher and social scientist who works at the intersection of political theory, philosophy, and history. Tucker is the author of several influential books, including Democracy Against Liberalism, The Legacies of Totalitarianism, and Our Knowledge of the Past. Welcome, Avi.
Thank you, Max. Good to see you after all those years.
Yes, indeed. Now, you're rather an expert on illiberal ideas, so let me just turn to that for a moment.
The big debate about totalitarianism is the Arendt thesis, that totalitarianism is a monster with two heads, communism and Nazism, that have really a lot in common. And then the people who used to consider themselves left circa 1980 said, no, this is not the case. What we have, the contrast is between democracy and authoritarianism. There is no totalitarianism, or totalitarianism is disappearing. And I still thought, and I still think that Arendt was basically right. The totalitarianism is a unique regime. It's distinct from authoritarianism. It's distinct from classical tyranny, and it should be studied differently. And looking at it from the perspective of today, it has different legacies than authoritarianism. So to understand the present, we have to see the path dependency on the past. And totalitarianism, because it attempted to totally annihilate civil society, which normal authoritarian regimes, military dictatorship, never try to eliminate civil society by creating a single social hierarchy that anybody, if you are politically powerful, you are wealthy, and you have attention from society, that it's just a single hierarchy which did not exist anywhere else. They changed society. And even once we get rid of the totalitarian regime, those legacies are still influencing society in a way that places like Spain or Portugal are not. They don't have the same kind of problems. They have different kind of problems because they had civil society and they had different social hierarchies. If you were rich, you were not necessarily politically powerful, and vice versa. It's a different kind of problem. On the other hand, for making economic reforms, it was easier after totalitarianism because there was no civil society, no trade unions to stop the economic reforms in the way that Greece and Portugal and Spain had to deal with very strong trade union movements, social movements that could block temporarily painful, but in the long term necessary reforms.
I accept that your expertise on this is far better than mine. So what would you tell someone like me, in broad strokes, is the best way to distinguish between totalitarianism, excuse me, on the one hand, and authoritarianism on the other?
The source of power. The source of power in authoritarianism is extremely easy to understand. People with the bigger guns have more power. If I have a tank and you have a rifle, I'm stronger than you. If somebody else has an airplane, they're stronger than if you have a tank. So that's very easy to understand, and that's been analyzed since the Greeks. It's tyranny. It's about who has more power. We look at Hobbes' political philosophy, same thing. And here's the absurdity of totalitarianism. The military, the people with the aeroplanes, with the tanks, with the boats, they're very weak. The military is a very weak institution in totalitarianism. So Stalin, for example, in the 1930s, was able to purge the military. People who had more guns and more tanks and more airplanes than he did. How did he manage to do that? Where's the power? What allowed him to do all of that? Where's the center of power in totalitarianism that is not the center of power in authoritarianism, military regimes? You want to take a guess?
I suppose it could be populism, sort of popular zeitgeist around the regime.
Zeitgeist doesn't have power, but just make the following thought experiment. Suppose you and I are artillery officers under Stalin and we hate him. And what we want to do is a military coup d'etat. and we'll find some other disillusioned officers, and we'll go to the Kremlin just like they go to the presidential office in ever so many places in Latin America. Why can't we do it? What would stop us from doing that?
Because then the military is a more self-contained unit with bigger guns, and it
Yeah.
threatens
So
kind of check.
well,
Why
no,
don't we do it?
we don't do it because you don't trust me. That's your problem, Max. You just can't trust me. And that's exactly my problem with you. I can't trust you. And you know why we can't trust each other? Because we could be agents for the secret police. And that's the source of the power. That's the institutional innovation of totalitarianism that didn't exist anywhere else. Now, there were some regimes, Napoleon, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, they had some secret police. They had a few hundred people who were spying for them. But to recruit 10% of the population as secret agents, that's totalitarianism.
Franco and Mussolini would be authoritarian, but the West German Stasi would be totalitarian. Is that?
Pretty much so.
I see.
Pretty much it. I mean, Mussolini also had a secret police, but the Stasi, the source of the power is the anonymity. Anonymity is stronger than guns because you don't know who to fight. You're fighting shadows. Because, of course, if you knew for sure that I was an agent for the secret police, you could kill me. But you don't. I may be your friend. I may be your enemy. You can't trust me. And we cannot organize. We cannot do anything together. And if we try to organize something and it's more than you and I, probably they will have somebody infiltrating us because it's 10% of the population. And if I teach in a class in a totalitarian state, I know that just the statistical odds that I have 2 or 3 agents in my class. You know, I will not say what I think or think what I say. That's the invention. That you create a society where the center of power is the secret police. Stronger, much stronger than the military. And the secret police is able to control the military. It's like an onion-like structure, where the core is the secret police. Around it is the political party. Now, classical totalitarianism, the secret police is spying on the political party. That is, the NKVD has agents in the Communist Party. That's how it controls. The Gestapo has agents in the Wehrmacht that report to Hitler if that's how they caught them. Right?
Forgive this brief interruption, but I suspect you're here because you're disillusioned with legacy politics. If you're a creative, a builder, or an innovator, you might be ready to win funding. Through Human Respect Labs, you can get up to $30,000 to fund your next creative project. But not just any project. We're looking for 6 kinds of builders: video storytellers, community builders, writers, entrepreneurs, strategists, and innovators, any of which should be dedicated to human liberation. That means making government obsolete. Why? We know too much energy goes into politics, but not enough goes into real solutions. So if you're a freedom lover and you have a project idea that promotes peace, autonomy, and voluntary collaboration, we want to hear from you. Apply now at humanrespectlabs.org. That's humanrespectlabs.org. Criticize by creating.
Totalitarianism begins to end, and that's what happens after Stalin's death, when the Communist Party says there has to be equality of power between the party and the secret police. And the way to achieve that is that the secret police, going forward, since Khrushchev, is not allowed to spy on the Communist Party. It can't have agents in the Communist Party unless the Communist Party approves it. So there's a committee. So they have to submit an application. I want to recruit this member of the Communist Party for the following reason. And then the important thing is not that it is approved. The important thing is that the Communist Party knows who is the agent. So it's not anonymous. So they have nothing to be afraid of. They know exactly who are the agents within the Communist Party, so they can say or not say what they want to say around them, because they know exactly who it is, and then they can trust each other. The side effect of that was a reduction in violence in general. That's what brings us to late totalitarianism. That is totalitarianism after Khrushchev, which was still no civil society, still very strong secret police, but in equality of power between the secret police and the Communist Party, that allows a lot of more corruption that happened before, because Stalin did not like corruption. If somebody was in Communist Party was stealing, they would end up in the Gulag or they would end up dead, which was not a great career move for people to join the Communist Party. Because of all the people, of all the gang around Lenin, only one man died of old age in bed, and that was Stalin. Everybody else, 100% of all these people around 1917 in this revolutionary gang, all killed. So why join the Communist Party? I mean, it's not exactly a long-term career, smart career move. So you say, okay, we finished with the Communist Party is above the secret police. The secret police cannot arrest them. The worst thing, if there's an internal power struggle within the Communist Party, people lose their jobs. That's it. They don't lose their life. They don't go to prison. They don't lose their property. They don't lose their family is not hurt. That's how you got late communism. And the side effect of that is also the communist or the secret police reduced the intensity of the oppression on society. The extent was identical. They were still trying to control everything. That's why they were totalitarian. They were still would punish anybody. But the intensity, executions, gulags, that was reduced dramatically, also because there was nobody to kill anymore. That is, and that's really a telling. If you compare the number of people in societies that had similar number of people, so look at Argentina, an authoritarian regime under the generals, and Hungary, a totalitarian regime. If you add up all the people who were executed, put in prison, or exiled in Hungary, you get 100 times, 0.1% of the population. So in Argentina, 10%, in Hungary. So the proportion is 100-fold. And why? Because totalitarianism has to eliminate all the elites. It's not just political elites. That is Pinochet or Franco. They were interested in political competition. So they wouldn't like liberal parties, socialist parties, and so on. But if you happen to be a successful businessman and you were not political, you were not terribly interesting for them. Let alone if you were a sports star, a prima ballerina, a priest. As long as you didn't get involved in politics, you were not interested. So they wouldn't spend energy on trying to control you or to kill you or put you in prison. You were just noise. Whereas in totalitarianism, the claim is you have to control all the elites. Anybody that somebody looks up to. It can be a prima ballerina. You know, why did Stalin go and execute prima ballerinas in the Bolshoi ballet? Why were these women dangerous to him? Because there's some kind of leadership. People would look up to them. It's a culture that respects ballet. So they had to be executed. A priest, a film star, anybody that somebody look up to, the whole elite. And the whole elite is about 10% of the population. So they had to be killed, or they had to be put in prison, or they had to go into exile if they were smart and fast enough. And then once you do this social revolution, that's a social revolution. It's not a political revolution. It's a social revolution because you eliminate elites. Once you do that, who's left to kill, for heaven's sake? Once Stalin was done, even if they wanted to continue with the terror, there wouldn't be a lot of, what they would have, the only people who would left to be killed would be new elites, not old elites, but elites that were already vetted by the Communist Party, by the secret police, which is indeed what Stalin was doing in the Great Terror. He was killing his own people. He wasn't killing liberals or noblemen or wealthy farmers. That was done earlier. There was no other elite left to be killed. And then who would want to become a member of such an elite when you're not born into it? So that was the absurdity of it. And the elite that emerged then in late communism was of people who were incredibly risk averse, incredibly anonymous. The whole point was don't draw attention to yourself. You draw attention to yourself, you end up in the gulag.
Never be a tall poppy kind of thing.
Yeah. Exactly. Never be a tall poppy. Exactly. That's
it
in a nutshell.
Me too that that when you have a kind of you can get an evolutionary phenomenon begin to happen once you unleash these forces of mistrust. In that the way you described it earlier is no one knows who they can trust. So it's almost like mistrust and trust are competing currencies in this regime. And the unfolding of mistrust throughout the system, even if it's just by making a few examples of people who are admired or elites and so on, can set this in motion to where you get, people telling on their neighbor, or even if your neighbor pisses you off by doing something that you don't like, by sticking something in your trash can, or just otherwise being too loud one night, you decide, well, I'm going to get my get back, and you report them. You can not be a tall poppy, but you can curry favor with perhaps the secret police, and then ensure yourself some protection for you and your family, because you're one who's willing to report those who would seek to go against the regime.
Well, I wouldn't say the concept of good citizen, you're already projecting a bit of Americanism there. There's no concept of good citizen.
Yeah.
What they are looking for is exactly a manipulable citizen. It doesn't have to be good. It has to be manipulable. Then they can trust them. Because if you stole a little bit of money in your place of work, and they caught you, now they can trust you because they can put you in prison. If you cheat on your spouse, and they have a photo, they can trust you, and vice versa. When the informing is not just because somebody pisses you off. The informing can be because of interest, not just whims, because you covet thy neighbor's wife. So if thy neighbor is in prison, then his wife is available, or because you covet thy neighbor's job. So if they are, that's how you get a promotion. It's pretty much like this. It's like the thief, there are always two: the master and the apprentice. And the apprentice has to kill the master.
You learn to do double dealing and manipulation and things in order to shunt someone else aside or step on their neck to begin to insert yourself into the ranks. And these are purportedly egalitarian societies, but there were decidedly ranks in the bureaucracy, and the bureaucracy was the source of resources essentially in those societies for you and your family. So there became a competition, not to engage in fair dealing, but to lie, cheat, and steal, essentially. Is that
it's
is that more or less what happened?
Well, it's a particular type of lying and cheating. It's not like a general lying and cheating. It's the kind of lying and cheating that would promote you in the eyes of the hierarchy. The egalitarianism is a myth, of course. There was no egalitarianism. These were always very hierarchical societies, even before communism. The most egalitarian probably were the Czechs, but the Russians, they had nobility, they were the mushiks, they were extremely hierarchical. The one thing that you learn very quickly in such a society, simply to survive, is to understand who has power and who doesn't. Because of the presence of the secret police, the actual hierarchy is not always visible. It's not when you look at an American company. This is the CEO. This is and the hierarchy is transparent. You know exactly who has the power, and if you want to get something done, you'll try to get as high up in the hierarchy as possible. No. When you have a society that is built like the hierarchies are parallel, they operate like onion shells. So you would have a factory, and there's a manager. Manager is not the powerful person. You have to know who's the head of the Communist Party in the factory, and you have to guess what does the secret police want to do, and what the secret police interest there, and who tells the head of the Communist Party there what to do. And what you would see is what people are afraid of around you. You start working in this factory, and you come from outside. So you'll see who are the people afraid of, who are the people listening to, who they defer to. Then you learn by kind of osmosis who has the power. And then you would try to carry favor with them. I'll give you a very concrete example from the 1990s. What happened in Czech academia is, of course, it was penetrated by the secret police. And then when the files opened, people would lose their jobs in that place if they really had blood on their hands and so on. But what the networks would do is that they would change places. So somebody was informing on people in University A, would lose his job in University A and get a similar job in University B. He would be replaced by somebody from University B. So, well, there was this kind of characters in my department. And as somebody who was studying Czech at the time, I loved him because he looked exactly like the uncle you always want to have. Beard, a pipe, deep voice, speaks very slowly, so I could really understand everything. He had an almost radiophonic voice. Somebody very clear. Only, God forbid, you would say anything critical of anybody else in the university, within 24 hours, that person would know about it. Because he would go and tell them. That's how you would try and curry favor with other people. You know, somebody, you have an enemy here, or somebody who was critical of you, be aware of them. And I'm your friend because I'm telling you to. So next time that I want a trip, a raise, a second job, remember who's your friend. And I think he was doing it. It wasn't cognitive. It was like he was making choices and strategizing and planning this. At this stage, at that stage, you know, he was in his sixties, so he had all his life in this system. It was a second nature to him. It was like us obeying traffic lights. Just
Right, right. It's
you know,
extreme bureaucratic incentives, and he's been in a system that he's come up in, so he's learned those bureaucratic incentives, and that it's almost like telling a fish that he's breathing water, and he's going, I don't, this, I, is that, is that, is that more or less what you mean? It's sort of like
it's second nature.
second
It was,
nature, yeah.
you know, you and I know that. I mean, not recently, I would say, but you know, you like a woman, bring her flowers. You don't think about, you know, that would be a way of showing romantic. No, this is our culture. You love a woman, you give her a flower, you send her a poem, you invite her for dinner, and you don't strategize. It's just natural. And for him, because he grew up in the system, instead of bringing flowers to the dean, he would tell the dean all the bad things that people said about him.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Well, you know, these patterns exist even in liberal societies and bureaucratic institutions around the country, and we do have here in the West and here in the United States where I am, and in the EU where you are, there are of a sort secret police. That is to say, it's not like you're worried about your neighbor necessarily being a member of some clandestine organization. At least that's a little far-fetched. But could there be patterns or markers even in in Western liberal democrats, purportedly liberal democratic countries? I'm seeing some things that really trouble me on both the left and right in Europe and the United States. But for someone who counts his or herself a liberal, are there indicators or markers for what could set alight a trend in this direction, where you could start to get these kinds of machinations or this kind of internal setup that could even be evolved instead of planned?
As with all such issues, we have to distinguish motive from opportunity. And both have been moving in a very bad direction, I would say, in the last 20 years. So, in terms of motive, the level of intolerance from the extreme right and the extreme left has been risen so dramatically in, I would say, certainly in the last 15 years, that as I tell younger people, I say, you know, I'm from the 90s. We were tolerant. You know, I would respect other people who had different opinions. I don't think that anybody who disagrees with me is either an idiot or evil. We can discuss, we can debate. But no, I mean, now if you disagree with somebody, it's eliminate, you know, in good German. And that's the whole mentality. And I encountered it, you know, because I thought, you and I know my radical aspects, my libertarian aspect, but within this unidimensional of that we find today with the left and populist left and right, I'm in the middle. So I have to fight enemies in both directions because they don't see the other dimensions. They just see this one dimension. So I'm certainly there in the middle, and that means people fight me all the time. And the way that they fight is they ignore, they stop talking. I'm sitting on a committee, they're trying to get me out of the committee. Even when I'm in a minority of one on the committee, that has to be total, like, you don't disagree, you have to eliminate. You don't have a vote to get a majority. You don't strive to get a majority. You strive to eliminate. And that's so dangerous. Of course, in academia, thank goodness they can't kill me, but they definitely try to just eliminate counsel rather than try and reach a compromise, which is totally unheard of these days, the word compromise. That's as far as motive is concerned. As far as opportunities are concerned, the problem now is technology. That now, if you look at the current totalitarian regime in China, now I don't, again, the archives are not open, so we don't know. But my guess is that they don't work so hard on recruiting agents as in the older days. What they do is just use electronics to see where people go, whom do they speak. They have artificial intelligence to go through people's emails, people's phone calls, try to gain information from people who are not their agents. They don't have to recruit agents anymore consciously. People don't have to agree. People are just being spied on by technology, and that created opportunities that are just so dangerous. You put these two things together, this mentality that the eliminate your opponent, plus the technological possibilities, and you get something quite dystopian in the offing.
Indeed, indeed. My kids ask me what I do for work, and I say, I write, talk into a microphone, and hope people send money. Now I'm questioning my life choices, but the kids gotta eat, and we have bureaucracies to topple. Support our work at underthrow.org, and for less than $5 a month, you'll help me rouse the rabble. Wait, what's underthrow? If overthrow is violent, underthrow is peaceful yet powerful. Real change doesn't start in Washington. Casting your vote with millions is like crying a teardrop into the ocean. Instead, we build consent-based communities that make traditional power structures obsolete. Left, right, or center, it doesn't matter. What matters is creating options for opting out and opting in. We build parallel systems in which people thrive, then just leave the old systems behind. It's about choosing communities, not imposing them. So, support the show, feed my kids, read the newsletter, and discover why most subversive acts amount to building a better civilization together. Visit underthrow.org. So on one side of the spectrum, then, you took an interest in totalitarianism, gained a lot of expertise in that, and have elucidated some of the fine-grained distinctions between that and authoritarianism. Let's go to the other end of the spectrum. If there is indeed, we can put it on a spectrum. I think perhaps we can. But the other end of the spectrum, based on what you said earlier, and I largely agree, is that we're somehow in the middle. I don't like using XY axes because there's invariably problems in doing that. But let's just say we're in the center and we are concerned about the authoritarian tendencies of the left and right. And this, of course, could degenerate into totalitarianism in some form or fashion in the future. And we both have that as a concern. But in terms of liberalism, in terms of a North Star, an ideal, you and I share an interest in a lesser-known theory of socio-political organization called Panarchy. What is Panarchy, and how would it work?
Well, Panarchy, the term was coined in 1860 by a Belgian philosopher. Actually, he's better known as a botanist, Paul-Émile Dupuit. He systematized actually the orchids family in botany. People don't know that. He also wrote novels. Anyway, his idea was very simple. The foundation of the state, like many philosophers said before, should be a social contract between the government and the people. But unlike all the other philosophers who preceded him, his idea was that the social contract is going to be explicit and it's going to be voluntary. It's not going to be in the midst of time. It's not going to be a rational agreement with people, as in John Rawls. If they didn't know who they were, this is what they would decide, and how on earth can you possibly adjudicate or judge that? Here I am, here and now. Here are my interests. Here are the things that I need. Here's what I'm ready to pay. Now I'll see what state offers me the services that I want for a price that I can pay. And the best thing about it is that it's non-territorial. So we can be neighbors. You will have one state, I will have another state, just like you may have a different insurance company insuring your home, and I have a different insurance company insuring my home. And if my bathtub overflows and the water goes into your apartment, we're not going to start a war. You'll be upset, but you will not come and shoot me. What will happen is that you will call your insurance company, and they will call my insurance company. They will come to some kind of a reasonable agreement to resolve this conflict between us. And if I don't like the insurance company, if I have this problem with you and they don't represent me in a way that I feel is appropriate, or they don't pay the insurance money, I go to a different insurance company. I exit. And because it's non-territorial, it reduces the price of exit dramatically to practically none. We have a voice or we have an exit. And the problem is when we don't have an exit. That's the basic problem with politics. Right now, I mean, I didn't like the American presidents almost in my lifetime. There was one or two that I liked when I was pretty young. Um, and I have nowhere else to go. I mean, okay, I'm going to the Czech Republic, but I can't systematically just stay in one place and change governments all the time. It's going to be too expensive. When you want to gain another citizenship, which I also did once or twice, you need to pay a lawyer. It costs money. There are, there are, there are hassles involved. Now, what if you just go to an office and declare in the same way that you would declare to your employer, this is my primary care physician, and you don't like your primary care physician, just change it and get another primary care physician. What would happen is a process that would increase dramatically competition between states, not military competition, competition over good customers, people like me. I'm stable, I have a family, I'm in good health, I pay taxes, I'm an excellent citizen, you want me, woo me, compete, offer me better services than other states. And you know very well that I can go somewhere else. It increases this level of competition. And it has, as a nice side effect, it solves all sorts of problems that were concerning Paul-Émile Depuis because he was Belgian. And oddly enough, in 1860, it was pretty much the same issues that Belgium is facing today. You have liberals, you have monarchists, you have Catholics, you have Protestants, you have Flames, you have Walloons. How can they all live together? And in comparison with other such countries like Northern Ireland, Belgians have been, on the whole, quite sensible about this. They don't want to kill each other and destroy the country in the process. They don't want a civil war. So the easiest way is just you have a plethora of state models. They can be based on different religions, different ideologies, different ethnic groups, and they can also be based, as I would choose a state, on their efficiency. I want an efficient state. I don't want to pay for a bloated bureaucracy. I want a state that serves my interests. I don't care their ethnic group. I don't care about their religion. I don't care about their monarchy. It can be a king or it can be a prime minister. I want them to serve me. And if they don't serve me, I'll go somewhere else. That's the basic idea. Interestingly enough, it emerges every decade. Somebody comes up with this. And the earliest that I found was, or to be more precise, the earliest that my co-author Gian Piero de Bellis found was Paul-Émile Depuis. But perhaps the most interesting thinker after Paul-Émile Depuis, who came up with the same idea without knowing anything about Émile Depuis, was Moritz Schlick, the founder of logical positivism in Vienna.
Interesting.
Because everybody thinks Vienna Circle, they were all Marxists. Many of them were. Not Moritz Schlick. And his inspiration there is St. Augustine, city of man, city of God, coexisting in the same territory. And his last book was supposed to be about this. It's called Natur und Kultur. Unfortunately, a deranged student murdered him. Well, it all has to be non-territorial because people are spread and live within each other, and you can't create some crazy ethnic cleansing that people would go into different nation states, which is unfortunately what happened in the end. So he comes out of this late Habsburg crisis, and he writes already in the 30s when Hitler is in power in Germany. He was murdered in 36, so he's writing, let's say, 1935, 1936. And he faces this craziness of the National Socialism, and his solution is, well, here's how we can solve this. Here's how Europe can move on, and we'll have people sign explicit social contract, non-territorial. The basis of a state would be a constitution, not an ideology, not an ethnic group, and people can exit and enter. So it's all there, and everybody comes up with this idea every few years. I came up with this also independently, without knowing much about any of that, simply as a critique of Robert Nozick. Because when I was still a graduate student, I read Anarchy, State, and Utopia like everybody else, and I was thinking, in the Utopia part, like when Nozick says, how does the state start? And he says, well, you would have organization of mutual defense, and then there would be conflict between these two organizations. So how they can resolve it? Well, sovereignty, which is the Westphalian solution in the 17th century. You create territorial sovereignty, and then what happens on territory determines where it is adjudicated. And I thought that's ridiculous. Firstly, it doesn't solve anything because people will go on having conflict and not recognize each other's territories. And secondly, there's really no problem because, as in the case of our two insurance companies, if we have a disagreement about who pays for the damage to your ceiling when my bathtub overflows, we're not going to start shooting each other. And our insurance companies certainly will not start shooting each other. That's neither here nor there. And today in the big cities in the world, New York, London, Sydney, you have people who belong to so many different state organizations, so many citizenships, and they somehow manage to work together and adjudicate the issue without suing each other in the territorial court. That happens to be the case because it's too inefficient, it's too expensive, it takes too long. People can live together and still have different political associations. And you can think about all sorts of minorities, Armenians, Greek, Jews, that Chinese in East Asia who don't want to appeal to the state. They don't trust the state. So they have their own way of adjudicating things without referring to the state. And again, in a totally non-territorial way. So I wrote about that. I published that as a kind of commentary on Nozick's. I showed it to a teacher when I was a graduate student, and he kind of summarized my argument in 5 minutes and he said, "Is this correct?" And I said, "Yeah, that's a fair summary." And then he says, "You're nuts," and he left the office. I just published it. I forgot about the whole thing. Published it. I think it was 99, something like that. And then 10 years later, there was this wonderful man called Gian Piero de Bellis write to me an email. I read your article. What's your position about Panarchy? And I have no idea what you're talking about. And he said, I have an archive, and he sent me like the link for it's all on the internet. I said, well, if that's what you have, then this is an anthology. Let's edit an academic anthology. And then there was a bit of a different mentality because his mentality was all about let's have everything free, everything accessible, open access. And I told him, Gian Piero, if you want academics to respect you, don't have it open access. Have them pay for it.
He reached out to me for the anthology that you published together and had me reconstitute an old blog post that I had done where he discovered that my thinking was indeed a rehashing of what Dupuy had done in 1860, and I was delighted. I was delighted that someone was thinking along these lines and had been for, 150 years, whatever. And I have to say, I remain committed in some sense to this idea to this day. I'm very dedicated to the project of understanding its dynamics and realizing it. And in that sense, I wonder, in the German translation that you're working on or in your own thinking, have you approached a means of realizing this? In other words, I think people like you and I tend to be able to understand a distant North Star and see how it would work, right? But it's a level of abstraction that we have to be careful about living in as a sort of fantasy land. Even though the dynamics work in our own minds, we have to think about what would be the mode and manner of implementation for this in stepwise, in time, in context. Have you given any thought, or do you know anyone who's given any thought to the types of either top-down reforms or bottom-up structures that could help push us in the direction of something like panarchy?
Right, that's a very complex question, so I'll have to take a bit of time. First, what you say, I mean, I respect this, that the limits of theory. There's this old joke that the State Department invites a French delegation to Washington. And one day, so they take him to see the White House and the Congress and the Supreme Court. So they see it all. And then at the end of the day, the elder of the French delegation thanks his host from the State Department. Really, we learned so much about American government and we know much more. And there's just one thing I still can't quite get. How does it all work in theory?
Nice one.
I know how it works in theory. My problem is the other way around, and yours as well. But first, what is very important for me, one of my favorite quotations is from Adam Michnik, the Polish dissident, who in the 1980s said, if I'm forced to choose between the communist dictator General Jaruzelski and the authoritarian dictator General Pinochet, I choose Marlene Dietrich. And that's I think it's a very important thing to say, because the rhetoric of the extremes, of the right and the left, they always give you this bivalent choice. It's either this or that. So if either you are Trump or you have to vote for Bernie Sanders, or either you vote for Bernie. If you don't want the leftist lunatics, you have to vote, for somebody on the other side. I don't accept the dialectics. I don't accept. If you push me, I will say, well, I want Panarchy. That's what I want. That's what I'm willing to fight for. This is where I believe in, and I don't need to choose sides. If you guys want to fight it out, I'm out. Now, the practicalities. So first, what I don't think is going to work, and there's always the narcissism of small differences. So you have the homestead people who want to start new free societies in the sea, start get off the territorial waters of the United States, usually off into the Pacific. Not going to work. Why is it not going to work? Why is it actually the opposite of what I want? Because they will be recreating nation states, maybe on a better foundation, but it will be yet another nation state in an extremely vulnerable one, because it will be so tempting for the territorial states that we know today to simply occupy them, because they just made themselves. You take a cherry and you put it in the Pacific Ocean. How much self-discipline would be required for somebody not to eat the cherry? Because they're going to be wealthy, they will not be paying taxes. So obviously, and somebody will make drugs there. Somebody will money launder there. There will be a cause for war, a casus belli, and because all the food has to come from somewhere else, all they have to do is to circle them and not to let food go in until they surrender. That would be, I think, will definitely not work. You can try Mars, but because it's far enough. But other than that, no. What I want to use is the incommensurability. As a metaphor, I would say weak interaction. There's dark matter in the universe, and we don't know much about it because it weakly interacts with matter that we know. What I want is states that non-territorial panarchic state that weakly interact with the territorial state. They're there. They just don't draw attention to themselves. They work pretty much the way that, let's say, American Express works. Where is American Express? I mean, American Express has a headquarters somewhere. But if somebody
Tennessee.
yeah, could well be. But look, if that headquarters was blown up, American Express doesn't disappear. American Express is information. It's a mainframe computer, and it can be anywhere. You can put it in the North Pole. It would still work. How a panarchic state should work. And you can just give it any name you want. It doesn't have to be called a state if you don't want somebody to get upset. You just call it Equestrian Mutual Aid Society of planet Earth. Nobody would pay attention. What you do, what is the essence of a state? We agree on a project. We agree on a constitution. And we agree on mutual assurance. So if you and I want to start a state, we can do that. The problem is that we don't have enough resources to really help each other if we get into serious trouble, because we're just two people. So the risk is very high. If I commit all my resources to help this state that you and I create, I can lose everything if you just get into trouble, if one person gets into trouble. So there's a certain minimal number of people that you need. But then it's a voluntary organization. It can appear or disappear as it wishes. It doesn't have to interact with nation states to a very great extent. What you would do is you would just find some refuge where the nation state doesn't pay attention and grow there. That's how it would work. What you would need is, the Balaji Srinivasan published in his book Network State, and his idea is basically, and he's exactly in this pattern. He's somebody I would have loved to be my graduate student. I would make him, read, because he wrote about things. He reinvented the wheel to a large extent, because he didn't read the literature, he didn't know about the poet, he didn't read what we were reading. But what's his reinvention of the wheel has some aspects that are indeed new, because he knows about networks and computers more than at least I do. And so his idea is basically it's having the source code. It's having the keys. That's the government. It's all online. So it's totally non-territorial because it doesn't even have a headquarters. It's in the same way that global nomads like myself, we work from our laptop computer. We don't have to have an office. We have a network of people who pay us, and we pay them, and that's how it works. Money in, money out, a kind of insurance. And then the same state can actually have different levels. The same way that an insurance company, if you are willing to pay more, you'll get more coverage. You want the state to handle your health insurance. Okay, it's going to be more expensive. And you want to have a cheaper program. Okay, you don't get health insurance. You have to take care of your health insurance in some other way without involving your state. You can bundle and unbundle as you wish. Trent MacDonald, who wrote an excellent Panarchy book from the perspective of political economy, is an Australian economist. He talks about it's all like bundling and unbundling. It's just like the services that the state gives you. It's like when you have, already an old outdated example, cable networks. They bundle things to you. And actually most of the channels you're not watching most of the channels because they bundle it for you. Your interest is to unbundle it. That's what the internet is doing. Then you can just purchase each channel that you are really interested in, and you don't pay for the stuff that you're not interested in. The same thing when you go to a hotel. They unbundle services. You want room service, it's an extra. You want breakfast in bed, it's an extra. The only thing that they all give you, they give you a bed and they give you a bathroom, which sometimes you have to share a bathroom. But it's all bundling and unbundling. And the state, a panarchy state, a non-territorial state, can do exactly the same thing. So who should start it? Start it by somebody who can have a business plan and offer services to people who don't have states to service them, and that would be mostly in authoritarian states that don't really serve people. You have people with money who would be very happy to get services from a state that would actually service them, that would actually take care of their needs, primarily security. Only that security in an environment that is controlled by the nation state will have to take different shape. It will not be very public. It can be a local security organization, like you have uh, neighborhood watches. It can be also a service to just get you across a border if you need to, if the nation state persecute you. The challenge would be how to do all that on a big enough scale that it would make economic sense, so that those states would not go bankrupt when they have 10,000 customers in North Korea that they need to get across the border, and how do they do that? That's would be the kind of challenge. There is also the method that Balaji Srinivasan suggests, is that we start some kind of a social club. It's not political.
Yeah.
It's just that we share a lot of interest.
Because a startup society.
Yeah, and then gradually it approaches or bundles in more and more services that a state would offer you. And you can see that in the model that you can look at, you can see how nation states, before they were nation states, when the national movement, how they started building institutions incubated within other states. You can see that the Free Irish state, before there was Free Ireland, the Zionist movement, before they had sovereignty over Palestine, they had institutions. They were providing services, health, representation, lawyers, and so on and so forth. And there were membership fees. And once they were successful in creating the nation state, then those institutions became just parts of the government. Now, we don't want a nation state and we don't want territory, but we can start building small institutions who then accumulate more and more responsibilities until actually it starts resembling a state. Now, what would be ideal in a perfect world, and I'm sure I'm not going to see that, is you have enough of those within a nation state, enough of those who serve citizens much better than the states do because they're not monopolies, that you would have at a certain point, somebody would turn on the light and say, hey, we don't need the United States, we don't need Canada, we don't need Mexico anymore, because we have our own, Panarchy A, Panarchy B, that's what we're working. So let's just wither away. Let's just sell off Washington and distribute the money, and that's it. That's going to be the end of it. Turn off the light. Like Soviet Union was disappeared, basically, like that. Just everybody went their own way because they already had these local territorial states, Ukraine and Russia and so on. Something like that may happen. Yeah, it could be utopian.
I think these are good questions. I mean, certainly it starts as a utopian project, and one can only sit around with one's own utopias for so long. And, speaking of Nozick, I was heavily influenced by Nozick. I thought it was a wonderful book. I, too, became disenchanted with some of his theoretical constructions around how you would back into a minarchist state, and how the subsidiary enclaves would work and so on. But he was spent more time backing us into what his quasi-panarchy would look like, and not enough time telling us how to implement it from where we are. In the United States, for example, there are already layers of institutions. There's federal, there is state level, county level, and each has its own bureaucracies and associated rules. And while I love even the more idealized system, if we think about moving toward that ideal, I would consider the Swiss system far superior to ours in this regard. Not far superior, but certainly superior. The Swiss have not gained this gargantuan bureaucracy that sits on top of the people in the way that the United States has now. And in fact, in my lifetime, I'm sort of watching sort of this vacillation, not only between left and right, these pendulum swings, but also between this slow motion sense of decline that could soon accelerate due to problems of sovereign default and so on. So putting aside for a moment the fact that we're both somewhat utopian, we have to think about the practical implementation measures. I think Balaji has some interesting ideas in terms of practical implementation. But I actually wonder whether it's going to take something like a sovereign default or some sort of collapse scenario to create a window of opportunity for something like this. And I don't want to. What's the old guy's name who was the cartel head in Colombia, and he was able to give a lot to the locals? Sorry, Escobar. Yes, Escobar, Pablo Escobar. He became beloved, at least in Medellin, for his, the way he treated people in his community and so on. And of course, there was all the mafia antics that surrounded the drug trade, killing people and offing them. And in many ways, there are parallels to the way the state behaves and the way he behaves. He was free with his largesse in helping people, and so he was able to curry their favor. But he was also punishing people who went against his regime, which is what governments do. And governments are everywhere, and they're really hard to get rid of. They're kind of like mafias. So they're formalized or legitimated mafias. But I think something like the decline of a great power like the United States, while it is unfortunate and will very well be painful, represents a window of liminality. So I don't want to hasten the decline of my own country, but I do think that it is a distinct possibility that we see this window when state capacity has been significantly weakened by the debt and default, or a debt jubilee of some sort. Who knows what it's going to look like, or just profound money printing where we become sort of like this Argentine malaise, sort of like we saw before Javier Milei took power.
Yeah, I like the wordplay, the Malays before Malay.
It was a total accident. I realized it when I said it, and I thought, man, I'm going to keep that. But Milei is actually wonderful, but his implementations are quite top down. He's going through the political means, and it strikes me that there may have to be some of that for move towards something like our ideal. The world speaks in riddles, markets, politics, power, the very nature of consciousness itself. But what if there were guides, a secret fellowship dedicated to reading the signs, to building bridges between the seen and the unseen? The gray robes operate in the space others fear or cannot comprehend. We map the territory between spiritual awakening and practical revolution, between ancient wisdom and radical innovation. 12 dimensions guide us. One mission impels us. Find out more at grayrobes.org. That's grayrobes.org. Let me switch gears though, because I think first we have to unpack the dynamics of the decline of civilizations. We saw the decline of the British Empire, the decline of Rome, Greece, Persia, you name it. There are these, and certainly there are wars involved in some of these situations. But ultimately maintaining the cost of maintaining empire at its periphery and at its center, when you have this sort of bloated, non-productive class that sits atop everything and sponges. They're both parasites and predators at once. I'm seeing this happening in the United States to a very great degree, and I can only hope that there's an opportunity in front of it. But I wonder, as a historian or someone who's interested in both philosophy and the patterns of history, if you are interested in those patterns, and do you think there are, or let me say it this way: do you think there are patterns of decline that we can take from one circumstance to the next and observe, sort of like the old British military governor Glubb? You know, he saw these patterns, or even the more quantitative approaches, such as those given in Cleodynamics by Peter Turchin. Do you think all this stuff is horseshit, or do you think there's something to it?
Well, we have to distinguish three things we can learn from history. There are repetitions, are precedents, and there are analogies. It's three different things. And it's quite tricky to know which is which, because most of the use of history for political purposes is indeed, as you said, it's rhetorical, and it's basically using a very limited set of examples to support pre-existing positions. There is what I call the reduction to Adolf. Everybody is, oh, it's another Hitler. Hitler was really exceptional. You know, there are a lot of bad people in the world, a lot of bad people in history. Hitler is quite, or you know, take the same compromise in international relations. You like it, you call it, it's Nixon to China. You don't like it, you say it's Chamberlain in Munich. And these are rhetorical flourishes, it doesn't mean anything. What we want to look at is, because history does not repeat itself ever. And the reason for that is that it is complex. But what you have is elements within history that repeat themselves, or that serve precedents, that is, they influence how we do things today. The same way that a legal precedent influences what a judge decides today. And then the looser relevant historical examples are analogies. It's similar in a certain respect, but it's not the same. Now, if you look at what you call the declines of empires and so on, of course, there's a lot of good work about it. The question is whether it's applicable, because you can always explain things backward. That's very easy. But predicting them forward is a different matter. Sure, you can try to explain the decline of the Roman Empire. Also, let's not forget, it took them 500 years. It was a very solid regime. Basically, the issue was, if you want to look at analogies, this is an analogy, not a repetition, their issue was immigration. The main challenge to the empire were the Germans. All these, you know, they were coming across the border, these blonde barbarians, and ruining stuff. They were given to criminality. They didn't respect the old Roman order. What do you do with them? Indeed, in the end, the Visigoths got, but 300-400 years they managed it. They settled them and they gave them citizenship. That's how it worked. First, they were given citizenship on a selective basis. You know, you play by our rules, you become a good Roman, you become a Roman citizen, then you're just like us. And then there was just universal, just everybody got the citizenship. And they were settling them, and then they were becoming soldiers. I mean, all the Roman legionaries in the late Roman Empire, they were German immigrants. They were just accepted the order and got a job. So there's a lot to learn there. Why do we see this decline today? I think there are two things. One is universal, and that's any monopoly will decline because they can't satisfy increase in demand. What is all this complaint that immigrants are coming and they overwhelm the welfare system, the education system? Do you see a private company saying, hey, we got million new customers. Oh, what shall we do? We have to get rid of our million new customers. That's a monopoly thinking, because a monopoly cannot, they are challenged. Then the quality of already very inefficient, low quality services goes down even further. So any monopoly will end up like this. And the solution is a panarchic solution. There has to be competition. You have to give the states the opportunity to expand, to franchise, and make money from taxpayers. That's our business. We want, if I am run a state, what I want is customers who work so they can pay me, who are healthy so I don't have to worry about their health insurance, And I want them to be law-abiding, so I don't have to waste time on putting them in prison. These are the people I want. These are the people that we are kicking out. That's just the absurdity of anyone. Then there's the absurdity of populism. Because populism of the left on the right, what makes it populistic is the belief that you can vote on the law of economics, that you can vote on the laws of nature. Maybe I don't like gravity, so let's have a majority and we will all fly, and that will solve a lot of problems. The belief that you can have the cake, eat it, and lose weight at the same time. It's irrationality based on projecting desires, passions on reality. And you see that very much in certain departments in universities where the criteria for truth is authenticity. That it's really what I really feel very strongly about must be true. No, what you feel strong about is probably false because your passions are warping your concept of reality. There has to be evidence, there has to be influence from evidence. That's why all populist regimes eventually are self-destructive. Whether it is on the left in places like Greece, whether it is on the so-called right in Argentina, they're self-destructive. So they're going to destroy them. There's no question about that. And here the question is, and that's what we can learn from the collapse of communism. The question was always, was there somebody ready to take over? Was there, were there people who were qualified, able, and willing to pick up the pieces once the system collapses? When you had such people like Václav Havel, then there was a smooth transition, no violence, and Czechoslovakia fell apart, but nobody died, nobody lost property, nobody. There was one state, and it became two states. That's it. Because there were people who were ready to deal with that. Okay, Slovakia especially didn't have they had cycles of populist governments and reasonable center-right government, and they've had now 3 cycles already. But at least in terms of there was no violence, no crime. When you don't have such elites ready, then the danger is that you have decline into civil war, decline into barbarism.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
what happened, unfortunately, when the Western Roman Empire collapsed. Then there was this 500 years of barbarism. That's when you have state failures because there's nobody ready to take over. Nobody's organized and ready. So the lesson, if you want, for us is we have to be organized. We have to be ready. We don't know when it's going to happen. We know that the decline of a monopoly is going to be prolonged, and they will not go quietly. But what you want is to have somebody ready to take over. And what is important for me, I mean, I'm not going to be a prime minister. I'm a philosopher. I'm a political thinker. What is important for me is to just say clearly, this is what I think is the solution.
Aviezer Tucker, I appreciate your coming today. Thank you so much.
Lovely to see you again, Max. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Lovely to see you too.